The first time he saw her, she was sitting on the hardwood floor of his living room with his daughter's curls tangled around her fingers, her laughter slipping easily into the high ceilings like it belonged there. Graham Morgan paused in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, tie loosened just enough to betray a long day and the subtle pressure behind his temples. He'd come home early on purpose, unannounced. It was a habit formed over years of boardroom strategy and power plays. When you ran a company worth billions, you didn't knock. You showed up and expected everything to fall into place. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was his home, or what passed for one since he'd moved into this house on the quieter side of Manhattan with Caroline after the divorce. And what he saw wasn't falling into place. The nanny was barefoot. There were crayons scattered across the Persian rug. Someone had drawn a smiley face on the edge of the coffee table in what looked suspiciously like permanent marker. Caroline was giggling in her lap, head thrown back, arms flung wide like she didn't have a single weight in the world. Graham took a slow breath through his nose. This wasn't the structured, composed after-school environment he'd signed up for. She noticed him a second too late. "Oh," the nanny said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice was light but steady. "You're home early." He narrowed his eyes, not missing the fleck of blue ink on her cheekbone. "I am," he said, setting the briefcase down with a muted thud, "and it seems I missed arts and crafts hour." Caroline scrambled off her lap, face flushed and joyful. "Daddy, Miss June taught me how to draw a dragon. He has wings and teeth and a castle." She grabbed his hand and tugged him toward the chaos on the floor. For a moment he let her. There was always that part of him, small, aching, softer than he liked to admit, that came undone at the sound of her laughter. But his gaze didn't leave the nanny. She didn't flinch, didn't rush to explain, just stood slowly, brushing off her jeans, still barefoot. "We got a little creative. I'll clean it up." "I'd rather you hadn't let it happen at all," he said. Her smile faded but didn't disappear completely. "Noted." Caroline tugged at his sleeve again. "Daddy, please don't be mad. Miss June is the best. She knows how to make up stories and she lets me pick music when we bake. Can she stay?" Graham looked down at his daughter's pleading face and felt the first crack in his perfectly scheduled, perfectly controlled afternoon. He was going to fire her. That had been the plan the moment he'd stepped into this circus of colored markers and chipped boundaries. But then Caroline's voice wavered just slightly at the word "stay," and something unfamiliar tightened in his chest. He sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We'll talk later," he said to June. She nodded once, eyes unreadable, then knelt back beside Caroline to help her gather crayons. He turned on his heel and retreated to his study, already wondering what the hell he was doing. June knew she wasn't the kind of nanny men like Graham Morgan hired. She didn't have the glossy degree in childhood development or the resume polished with elite Manhattan families. She wasn't afraid to let kids get messy or bend the rules when it meant keeping a spark alive in them. But she needed the job, more than she wanted to admit, and after the first week with Caroline, it had stopped being just about needing. The little girl had a tender soul and questions that tumbled out of her like a waterfall. She carried sadness around her edges sometimes, small and quiet, the kind that came from absence. And June had recognized it, seen herself in it. So when she heard the muffled rise and fall of Graham's voice in his office, presumably with someone from HR, she felt the first pinch of dread. She'd known it was coming. It always came when people like him saw people like her. She wasn't polished. She didn't play by their rules. But then Caroline knocked on the door and slipped inside with the kind of quiet only a child can master. A few minutes later, June was called in. Graham leaned back in his chair, hands steepled under his chin. His suit jacket was draped over the back of the leather armchair, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired. "Miss Everhart," he said as she stood in the doorway. "June," she corrected. "Everyone just calls me June." He studied her like a puzzle he couldn't decide if he wanted to solve. "I brought you on to provide structure, boundaries, a schedule. Caroline has been through enough instability. She doesn't need a babysitter who lets her finger paint the furniture." "I'm not a babysitter." No, he arched a brow. What would you call yourself? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped inside, hands at her sides. I'm someone who sees her. I'm someone who listens when she says she's not hungry because she misses her mom. I'm someone who doesn't punish her for not knowing how to say that yet. The silence stretched between them. He looked away first. She asked me not to fire you, he said. June's heart jumped once, then steadied. She told me you make her feel safe, he added. She hasn't said that in over a year. There was something brittle in his voice, something he hadn't meant to show. She didn't say anything, just let it sit there. He cleared his throat, leaned forward again. You have 2 weeks. Prove to me that your approach isn't just chaos disguised as care. If I see progress, real, measurable progress, we'll talk. She nodded once, understood. But as she turned to leave, he added something so quietly she almost missed it. Thank you for seeing her. By the end of that week, Graham started coming home earlier. He didn't plan it that way. Meetings just ended faster. Traffic seemed to move smoother. And when he walked through the door and saw Caroline curled up with June reading a picture book with all the voices, something inside him, something he'd thought was buried beneath contracts and deadlines, began to shift. He started noticing things. The small braid in Caroline's hair with a ribbon he didn't recognize. The playlist of jazz and fairy tales playing softly during dinner. The smell of cookies baking on Tuesdays. June had created a rhythm in the house that didn't look like his, but it made Caroline glow in a way he hadn't seen since before the divorce. He still didn't know what to make of June herself. She was infuriatingly calm, confident without being arrogant. She didn't back down when he challenged her methods. She just explained them with patience and a quiet fire that made it hard to argue. She wore oversized sweaters and kept her phone tucked away during her hours. She laughed with her whole body, and every now and then she looked at him like she wasn't intimidated, like she saw something other than CEO, ex-husband, and absentee father. It made him uncomfortable. It made him curious. One night after Caroline had gone to bed, he passed the living room on his way to the kitchen and found June sitting on the couch, staring at the lights of the city outside the window. The TV was off. Her hands were wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. She looked peaceful. And for the first time in years, Graham found himself wishing he could sit next to someone and not say a word. He didn't, of course. He just watched her for a moment and then kept walking. But the thought stayed with him. Something was changing, not just in his house, in him. And that he wasn't sure he was ready for. 2 weeks came and went. Graham had expected to count down the days with a sense of vindication, ready to reclaim his schedule and replace June with someone more in line with his expectations. Someone orderly, discreet, less inclined to let his daughter draw dragons on antique furniture. But the conversation he'd planned never came. Because by the 14th day, June had quietly, stubbornly shifted the atmosphere of the entire house. It wasn't just Caroline who changed, though she was undeniably more open now, more expressive, less anxious. It was the stillness that came with the morning routine, the subtle warmth in the kitchen, the soft hum of music woven through the background of each evening. It was the way silence no longer echoed but settled. One morning, Graham came downstairs to find Caroline at the breakfast bar, hair still damp from her shower, eating French toast that June had cut into star shapes. June was singing softly under her breath, some tune he didn't recognize, and Caroline was humming along like they did this every day. Maybe they did. He paused just long enough for June to notice. Good morning, she said, offering him a cup of coffee without asking. Cream, no sugar, she remembered. Thanks, he took it, trying not to frown. You're still here. She raised an eyebrow as she reached for a dish towel. You said 2 weeks. I did. And it's been 16 days. Caroline looked up, fork paused halfway to her mouth. Daddy. Graham met June's gaze over the rim of his coffee. She didn't push. She didn't plead. She just waited. He looked at his daughter. She's staying. Caroline whooped and launched herself around June's waist, nearly knocking over her glass of orange juice. June just laughed and hugged her back, and Graham watched them with something caught in his throat. He cleared it unnecessarily, but we're going to set some ground rules. June tilted her head. Are we? I run a company, I believe in structure. You also live with a 7-year-old who thinks pancakes should be rainbow-colored, she said lightly. I think we can meet in the middle. What? Graham found himself altering his routine. Meetings got shifted, workouts postponed. He started working more from home. It made sense, logistically. Caroline was happier with him around, and there was something about hearing her footsteps upstairs while he reviewed quarterly earnings that reminded him what all the effort was for. He told himself that's all it was. But then came the evening when he walked into the kitchen to find June barefoot again, sleeves rolled up, wrist deep in a mixing bowl. She had flour on her cheekbone, a stubborn curl tucked behind one ear, and she was scolding the oven under her breath like it had personally wronged her. He leaned against the doorway. Should I be worried? June glanced up, startled, then laughed. Only if you don't like slightly aggressive cookies. Caroline popped up from behind the counter with a wooden spoon. We're experimenting. With what? He asked. Science, June said, or possibly sugar, it's a fine line. They made him try one, it was terrible. They all laughed anyway. It was the kind of evening that passed quietly but stayed with you. Graham didn't know what to do with the way it lingered, with the way he caught himself thinking about it in the middle of board meetings. He didn't know what to do with the sound of June humming in the laundry room, or the way she instinctively reached out to straighten Caroline's collar before school, or how she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, softly, like she was trying to see past the title he wore like armor. June never asked questions about his work. She never hovered when he retreated into his study, never tried to pull him into conversations he didn't want to have. But one night a storm rolled in hard and sudden, shaking the windows and knocking out the power. Caroline was curled up on the couch under a blanket, wide-eyed, flashlight in hand. June had set up candles along the kitchen counter and was rummaging through the cupboards for something that didn't require electricity. Graham had just finished a tense call on his cell, something about a manufacturing delay in Singapore. When he stepped into the room and took in the flickering light, the scent of cinnamon, the sight of June pouring cocoa into mismatched mugs. She handed him one without looking up. Rough call. He blinked. How did you? You only rub the side of your neck like that when you're stressed. He looked down at his hand. He hadn't realized. Thanks, he said, taking the mug. You don't have to talk about it, she added. I figured cocoa can't hurt. It was such a small gesture, nothing dramatic, no speeches. But it anchored him in a way that made the breath go out of his lungs more slowly than usual. He sat down across from her at the counter. The storm cracked again outside, rain lashing the windows, but inside the kitchen it was warm. Comfortable. Caroline had fallen asleep under the blanket. She used to be scared of storms, he said quietly, watching her chest rise and fall. She'd sleep in our bed between me and her mother. After the divorce, she just started sleeping through them. June glanced at him, or pretending to. He looked at her. She's very good at pretending she's okay. He stared into his cocoa. June didn't press. She just sat with him, candlelight soft against her face, and let the storm pass. Later that week, Graham ran late. Meetings had stacked, traffic was brutal, and by the time he made it home, the sun was long gone. The house was quiet, lights low. He expected to find Caroline asleep. What he didn't expect was the soft sound of piano drifting from the living room. He walked in silently. June was sitting on the bench, fingers moving with gentle precision across the keys. It wasn't a song he recognized, just notes, simple and slow, like she was playing only for herself. She didn't notice him. The music slowed, faltered, and stopped. She sat for a moment, eyes closed. Then she turned and froze. I didn't know you were home, she said. I didn't know you played. She looked down, self-conscious. Just a little. I used to sneak into church after hours and practice on the old upright in the corner. He stepped farther into the room. Why'd you stop? She smiled faintly. Life got loud. Graham nodded. He understood loud. Boardrooms, earnings reports, settlements, phone calls. Even his grief had been loud in its own quiet way. He looked at her in the dim light. "You don't have to stop here." She glanced at the keys, then back at him. "Only if you don't mind the occasional wrong note." "I've heard worse." She laughed softly. Graham stayed longer than he meant to. Sat on the arm of the couch, jacket discarded, tie loosened, and let the music wash over him. And when she played again, it felt less like background noise and more like something important, something private, something just for them. The next weekend, they took Caroline to the park. It wasn't planned. June had packed a picnic on a whim and Caroline had begged. Graham hadn't meant to say yes. He had emails, deadlines, a proposal that needed review. But then Caroline had looked at him with that gap-toothed smile, and June had raised an eyebrow like she dared him to say no. And suddenly, he was carrying a basket through Central Park like a man who had no meetings waiting for him. The three of them sat on a blanket under a wide oak tree. June had brought sandwiches and lemonade. Caroline chased pigeons and came back breathless, hair wild. Graham leaned back on one elbow and watched them both. Sunlight dappled across June's face, her laughter like wind through leaves. It hit him then. How much he'd missed. Not just moments with his daughter, but moments like this, simple, unscripted, human. And June, she'd brought them back into his life like she hadn't even meant to, like she hadn't even known what she was healing. He wasn't ready to name it, not yet. But something was blooming. Something that didn't care about his plans. The first time Graham found himself watching the clock because he wanted to see her, he told himself it was just about Caroline. Routine was important for kids, predictability. June brought that into their lives in a way he hadn't expected. She made transitions easier, mornings less tense, evenings more grounded. Graham appreciated efficiency, and June had a way of making the household hum like a well-run machine. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about his daughter. It was the way June looked at him when she listened, like she actually cared about the things he said, not because of his title or status, but because she was interested. It was the way her smile lingered when she wasn't looking at anyone, the way she remembered small things, his favorite kind of tea, that he always forgot to wear a scarf even when the air turned sharp. And yet, he never knew what to do with the space between them. Sometimes it was casual, her brushing past him in the hallway, her laugh at something Caroline said. Sometimes it was sharp and quiet, like the moment she caught him staring too long across the kitchen counter and didn't say a word. He didn't act on it, he didn't flirt, didn't cross any lines. But one night that quiet space stretched just a little too far. They were sitting on opposite sides of the kitchen table, papers scattered between them. Caroline's school had sent home a flyer about a spring talent show. June had been the one to bring it up, casually mentioning how Caroline had started making up little songs while brushing her teeth. "She could sing," June said, tapping the flyer. "She hums all day, has pitch too." Graham frowned in front of people. "She might love it. She might panic. She might surprise you." He leaned back, crossed his arms. "That's a risk." June met his gaze, so is growing up. The silence between them stretched tight. He studied her, the curve of her jaw, the stubbornness in her eyes. She didn't look away. "She gets her nerves from me," he said eventually, softer. June's expression changed, not pity, never pity, but something gentler. She reached out, not to him, but to the paper between them, her fingers brushing a corner. "Or maybe," she said, "she gets her heart from you too." He couldn't speak for a moment. Couldn't think of anything businesslike or detached to say. Instead, he watched her tuck her hair behind her ear and stand up slowly, gathering the dishes. She didn't say anything else. But Graham sat at that table long after she'd gone upstairs, and for the first time in years, he felt the ache of something unspoken that wanted to be named. A week later, Graham found himself walking into Caroline's school for the first time in months. June had insisted they both attend the class's open house. "It's important she sees you here," she'd said, and he'd known she was right. Still, he'd hesitated. His calendar was a war zone of obligations. but she tilted her head and looked at him like skipping it would be a decision he'd regret. So he'd rearranged, cleared the evening. He arrived just after June, who was already kneeling beside Caroline's art display. When she looked up and saw him, something flickered in her eyes, not surprise, something warmer. He didn't miss the way Caroline's face lit up. She grabbed both their hands and pulled them to her corner of the classroom, showing them her drawings and her clay sculpture, a wobbly but proud-looking lion. "You helped with this one," she told June, pointing at a picture of a girl standing under a tree with stars above her. "You said it could be me dreaming." June smiled. "It is you dreaming." Graham looked at the drawing, at the tiny initials in the corner, C.M., and felt something stir again. Later, when the parents milled around and the kids ran wild, June leaned on the edge of a desk, watching Caroline laugh with a classmate. "You're good at this," he said. She looked over. "At what?" "This, her, all of it." June shrugged lightly. "It's not hard to love a kid like her." "No," he said, voice lower now, "but it's hard to be consistent." That made her pause. "Then so be consistent." It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't an accusation. It was said with that same quiet clarity she always used when she saw something he wasn't ready to admit. He didn't answer. But he did show up again, for the talent show sign-up, for the rehearsal, for the night Caroline asked him to braid her hair because June taught her how to say it just right. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Graham realized he wasn't just choosing Caroline anymore. He was choosing them. One night, June didn't show up. No call, no text. Caroline waited at the window, backpack at her feet, a drawing in her hands she'd made just for June. "She's never late," Caroline said softly, the way a kid speaks when they're trying not to worry. Graham checked his phone again. Nothing. Eventually, he dropped Caroline off at school himself. The silence in the car was unfamiliar and heavy. He called June twice that day. No answer. By the time evening came, something in Graham had started to fray. Not knowing, that was the part that clawed at him. He wasn't used to not knowing. Then just after 9, his phone buzzed. "June, sorry, family thing, emergency. I'll explain tomorrow, I'm okay. Tell Caroline I'm sorry I missed her drawing." He stared at the message for a long time. She signed it with a period. She never did that. He typed out a dozen responses, deleted all of them. In the end, he wrote only, "Graham, let me know if you need anything." She didn't reply, but he left his ringer on that night. When June came back the next morning, she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, no makeup, hair scraped into a bun. She was wearing the same sweater she'd worn 2 days ago. Caroline launched into her arms before she even reached the kitchen. "You're back." June hugged her tight. "I'm back." Graham watched from the doorway, waited until Caroline went to get her drawing from the fridge. June didn't look at him. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "My dad's in the hospital. He had a fall. He's okay now, but I needed to get to him." Graham's voice softened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to make it a thing." "You left without a word." "I thought it would be one night." "It was." She finally looked up, eyes tired. "I didn't mean to worry you." He stepped closer. "You didn't, you scared me." That landed heavier than he meant it to. Her shoulders sank. "I'm not used to people being scared for me." "I am," he said, "now." They stood like that, quiet and closer than before. Then Caroline bounded back into the room, and the moment passed. But it didn't fade. Not completely. Later that week, Graham found a new drawing on the fridge. It was of 3 figures standing under a sky full of stars. A man, a woman, and a little girl between them holding both their hands. He looked at it for a long time. And when June came into the room behind him, he turned. Their eyes met. Neither of them said it. But the distance between them had changed. Something unspoken had been pulled into the light. Something they weren't sure what to do with yet. But it was real. And it was waiting. Spring came late that year. The days stretched longer, but the air still held a chill, and the city moved a little slower as it waited for warmth to settle in. Graham noticed it most in the mornings. The light through the windows was softer now, the kind that made him pause at the kitchen door before walking in, just to watch. June was at the stove, hair tied up, humming faintly as she flipped pancakes. Caroline sat at the counter coloring a menu she'd made out of printer paper, offering breakfast specials in crayon, unicorn waffles, rainbow milk. It felt like a family. Graham didn't say it out loud, not even to himself, but the word kept circling him lately, in the silence of late nights, in the accidental brush of June's arm as they reached for the same plate, in the way Caroline said "we" now when she talked about the three of them. They'd found a rhythm. And that scared him more than he expected. It started to unravel on a Thursday. Graham was running late, an early meeting, an investor call, traffic that didn't care about his deadlines. He texted June that he'd be back by 6, maybe earlier. He didn't walk through the door until 8:30. Caroline had already eaten. She was watching a movie on the couch, curled into June's side, half asleep. June didn't move when Graham entered, just offered a small nod and went back to watching the screen. Something in her expression was off. After Caroline went to bed, Graham found her in the kitchen, rinsing plates even though the dishwasher was half empty. "You're late," she said without looking up. "I texted. You said 6. She waited until 7 before she gave up." Graham exhaled, tugging at his tie. The meeting ran over. She kept checking the window. He didn't have a good answer, so he didn't offer one. June turned off the faucet, hands braced against the edge of the sink. "She asked if you were still coming back," she said softly, like she couldn't count on it. The words cut deeper than they should have. "She knows I work," he said, straighter now. "She also knows when she's not a priority." That made him bristle. "That's not fair." "No," she said, finally facing him. "What's not fair is a little girl memorizing traffic patterns to guess if her dad's going to make it home in time to say goodnight." The silence that followed was sharp and cold. He took a step back. "I didn't ask for this." June's face didn't change, but something in her eyes pulled tight. "Didn't ask for what?" "This mess. This life where I'm balancing a company, a broken marriage, and now someone who thinks she gets to tell me how to be a father." Her expression shuddered. "I see," she said. He knew he'd gone too far, felt it in his chest immediately, but pride was louder in the moment. June nodded once like she'd expected it all along. "I'll give my notice tomorrow." "You don't have to." "I do," she said, "because I'm not just the nanny anymore and we both know it." He didn't stop her when she walked out of the kitchen. Didn't say a word. But that night the house felt colder than it had in months. The next morning, Caroline was quiet at breakfast. She picked at her cereal and asked if June was coming back after school. Graham hesitated too long. "June's taking a little time," he said. "She'll let us know when she's ready." Caroline didn't cry. She just nodded and looked out the window like she was used to things slipping away. It gutted him. He went into the office but didn't last long. Every meeting blurred. Every email felt unnecessary. Around 2 in the afternoon, he walked out of a quarterly review and called her. June answered after 2 rings. "Hey," she said, voice unreadable. "I shouldn't have said what I did." "No," she replied, "you really shouldn't have." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to do this, June. I'm not good at letting people in. I wasn't asking you to be perfect." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it harder." There was a pause on the other end. "I was trying to help," she said finally. "I know you were. And I was falling for you." He closed his eyes. That truth, finally said aloud, cracked something in him wide open. "I was too," he said quietly. "Still am. But you don't trust it." He shook his head even though she couldn't see it. "I want to, I don't know how." Another silence. "Then start small," she said. Start by showing up. That weekend, Graham canceled everything. No calls, no emails, no assistants following him with a clipboard. He took Caroline to the library, to a bookstore after that. He let her pick lunch and sat with her for over an hour just talking about things that didn't matter, favorite animals, what superpower she'd want, whether jelly beans could be used as currency. On Sunday morning, he showed up at June's building with a coffee and no expectations. She opened the door slowly, sweater sleeves pushed over her wrists, hair undone. "You're early," she said. "I didn't sleep much." June leaned against the doorframe. "Me neither. I want to fix this. I'm not a problem to be fixed." He nodded. "I know, but I think I might be." That got half a smile from her. "That's a start." He held out the coffee. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside. "Come in." They sat on her small couch in the sunlit apartment he'd never been in until now. Books stacked on the windowsill, a dusty keyboard in the corner, the scent of vanilla and something citrus he couldn't place. "I was scared," he said, "that what we had would take something from me I couldn't afford to lose." June looked at him. "Like what?" "Control, distance, the version of myself that made peace with being alone." She studied him, "And now I think losing that version might be the best thing I ever do." She didn't answer for a long moment. "Then I don't want to be a secret part of your life, Graham." "You're not. I don't want to be something you hide when it gets inconvenient." "I know. Caroline sees us, whether we say it or not." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time we start saying it." June exhaled, looking out the window. When she finally turned back to him, her voice was soft. "I love that kid," she said. "I know. I didn't mean to fall for her, or you, but it happened." He reached for her hand. "I didn't mean to either," he said, "but I'm not running anymore." June closed her eyes briefly, like something heavy had finally lifted. When she opened them again, he was still there. Still holding her hand. Still choosing them. They walked back into the house later that afternoon, side by side. Caroline was reading on the couch, and when she looked up and saw them together, her whole face lit up. She didn't ask any questions. Just said, "Are we having dinner together tonight?" June looked at Graham. Graham looked at June. "Yes," he said, "we are." It was the smallest of beginnings. But it was the right one. By June, the mornings felt different. Not louder, still soft, still gentle, but fuller somehow. Graham started waking before his alarm, not for a call, not to rush, just to hear the house stretch and yawn around him. Caroline's footsteps padding down the hallway, June humming while she watered the plants on the windowsill, the low murmur of two voices sharing thoughts over toast. The stillness wasn't empty anymore. It had shape now, and Graham moved through it differently, with less weight on his shoulders and more awareness of how each moment passed. He hadn't asked June to move in, not yet. There was still space between their lives, her small apartment, her independence, her carefully protected rhythm. But she was here more often than not, and Caroline no longer asked why. Sometimes Graham caught himself reaching out just to feel the curve of June's back as she passed, or to rest a hand on her knee beneath the dinner table. Not because he needed to anchor her, because he liked knowing she was real, still choosing to stay. One night they sat together on the back steps after Caroline had gone to bed, the sounds of the city quieted by distance. A blanket draped across both their legs. June had her head on his shoulder, and Graham, who used to count silence in seconds, found he didn't need to speak. "I used to think I wasn't built for this," he said finally, voice barely above the breeze. "This?" she asked. "Family, dependence, the slow domestic stuff. I thought it would break me." June was quiet for a moment, then and now. He turned toward her, one hand brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Now I think I just hadn't met the right person to do it with." She didn't smile, she didn't blush. She just looked at him, steady and unflinching, the way she always had. "I'm not going to rescue you from yourself, Graham. I know. And I'm not here to fix the parts you won't face. I know that too." But if you show up for real, every day, not just when it's easy, I'll stay. His throat tightened. I want you to. And not just for Caroline. No, he said, threading his fingers through hers. For me. June kissed him then, not the way she had once in the hallway when everything had been fragile and uncertain. This time it was rooted, certain, a promise that didn't need ceremony. Just presence. Summer came like a slow exhale. On Caroline's birthday, they hosted a small party in the backyard. Just a few classmates, some neighbors, a cake June had baked from scratch and decorated with ridiculous care. It leaned slightly to one side, and Caroline declared it perfect. There were balloons and sidewalk chalk, and Graham, wearing a paper crown because Caroline said every king needs one. He didn't argue. June watched him from the porch, arms crossed loosely, her sundress catching in the breeze. He caught her watching and smiled in that quiet way he did now, open and unguarded. Later, after the guests had gone and the cake had melted into frosting-streaked plates, Caroline sat on the grass between them, cradling a homemade card in her lap. I made this for both of you, she said shyly, holding it out. Inside there was a drawing. 3 figures again, but this time there was a house behind them, and the words "home is here" written in careful, wobbly letters. June's hand found Graham's without a word. He brought it up on a Tuesday. They were cleaning up after dinner, Caroline upstairs reading, the radio playing something soft and old. Graham reached for a dish towel, then stopped, drying his hands on his jeans instead. I've been thinking, he said. June raised an eyebrow. Dangerous territory. I want you to move in. She didn't answer right away. She took the towel from his hands, folded it slowly, deliberately, then met his eyes. You're sure? Yes. Because this isn't a temporary arrangement. It's not just you and me. I know, he said, it's her and it's us, and I want all of it. June studied him for a long moment, then she nodded once. Okay. They moved slowly. June kept her apartment a little longer just in case, but more of her things found their way into the house with each passing week. A stack of books on the nightstand, a throw blanket she swore was magic, her piano keyboard set up in the corner of the living room where the light was best. And one Saturday, without planning to, Graham caught himself humming along to one of her songs while he made breakfast. She didn't say anything. Just walked up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and leaned her cheek against his back. They didn't need to name it anymore. It just was. That fall on a quiet afternoon, Graham picked Caroline up from school. As they walked toward the car, she tugged on his sleeve. Daddy. Yeah, bug. You know how June is like, ours now. He smiled, yeah. I think that's my favorite part. He bent down and kissed the top of her head. Mine too. It didn't happen all at once. The healing, the changing, the soft rewiring of everything Graham thought he knew about love and control and what made a life worth building. It happened in layers. In bedtime stories that ran longer because no one was in a rush. In Friday night pancakes and shared playlists, and inside jokes whispered across the dinner table. In the hard conversations, too, the ones where no one had the answers, but they stayed anyway. June never became someone different. She remained the same woman who let Caroline draw dragons on the furniture, and told stories with too many voices, and played the piano when she thought no one was listening. And Graham, he didn't lose himself. He just let go of the version that had been surviving instead of living. There was no big declaration. No perfect ending. Just a house filled with laughter. A child who felt safe. 2 people who stopped running. And the quiet, undeniable truth that sometimes, love shows up exactly when you were planning to let it go.